Welcome back to DotLife. We are on a pretty steamy day here in Dorchester, but I'm joined in a very nicely air-conditioned space at Ashmont Cycles here on Dot Avenue with the owner of the place, Jack Pelletier. Jack, thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes, thanks for coming.
And Mandy Wilkens, who is a staff member at the Boston Cyclists Union. Hey, Mandy.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to have this conversation today. We're going to talk all about bicycling, which is a subject I don't know a lot about. So I'm going to be relying on both of you to give me a little bit of information. Before we start, the first question I have for you is, how often do you have Queen's bicycle song in your head? Because I have had it in my head since I decided to do this episode.
In my early years of the shop, I think I had it more often, but not so much
Not so
now.
much anymore.
Believe it or not, I haven't thought about that song in so long.
Well, you will all day now, so
Now
you're
I will.
welcome.
Now I
Yeah.
will.
So, actually, the first question I actually have for you is, can you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about Ashmont Cycles and the Cyclists Union? And Jack, I'll start with you.
Yep. My name is Jack Pelletier. I live here in Dorchester, and I opened this shop in March of 2011, so we're in our 15th year right now. For 9+ years, the shop was located about a block north of here at PVD Square, and then we moved here in August of 2020, and the shop has grown. It's been well received, and I'm very happy to have done this and be doing this.
Awesome. Mandy?
Yeah, I'm with the Boston Cyclists Union. We are an advocacy group that's trying to make Boston and greater Boston streets safer for everybody, no matter if you're riding on 2 wheels, 4 wheels, or 2 legs. And most of our campaigns are volunteer-driven. We also have a data team that looks at maps, tries to create stories with the data that the city's producing, but not doing a whole lot with. And so, yeah, we're responsible for a lot of the safer infrastructure that you've seen popping up in the city, alongside the mayor's office and the streets cabinet. And yeah, we're really proud of the work that we've done.
Awesome. I want to talk about bicycling basics for people like me who don't really bicycle very often. Beneficially, obviously, this has a lot of perks for health, for mental health, for your social life. Mandy, I want to start with you. Can you talk about some of the reasons that you guys push or advocate for bicycling as a hobby/lifestyle?
I mean, like, you're totally right. There's health benefits. Obviously, it's, depending on how you do it, it's a form of very good exercise, keeps you fit. It's great for your mental health. It's one of the only modes of transportation where, you can see all around you. You can talk to the person riding next to you. You can see a friend on the street and stop and say hi and chat for a little bit, which you don't get in a car. Sometimes on a train. But it's
Sometimes
also
when you don't want it on a train.
Yeah, exactly. But something that I always advocate for, one of the big reasons I started cycling, is that it's also one of the cheaper ways to get around the city. Mm-hmm. Bikes are not particularly expensive in the long run, and they're pretty much free to ride from point A to point B, especially bike share systems like Blue Bikes. It's like $60 a year. Like, really can't beat that.
Wow.
So,
and they're pretty much all over now. I see them.
Oh, yeah.
in a lot. They've really increased the number of places that they have Blue Bikes in the city.
Especially with the e-bikes.
Yeah. And Jack, what do you hear from folks who come in looking for potentially their first bike? Is there a reason that they start picking up this hobby?
A lot of people are interested in picking it up because it's just an easier way to get around town.
Yeah.
Boston traffic's notorious. Everyone knows that. It's
Yes.
frustrating. And then, some of the challenges that the T has had to go through shutting down, and some of the inconveniences that's had for some people in the short term. I think that has spurred people to take a look also as to other options to get around.
Yeah. What about from a health perspective? Do people generally pick it up, or is that just a byproduct of changing lifestyle?
I think a lot do. A lot of people will come in and say, "Yeah, I'm here for a bike. I need to," and they might pat their belly. Here, I gotta lose some weight. Or,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the majority. I think it's more people just wanting to, being able to bike in the city. And I think that while the city has more to do in terms of incorporating more bike infrastructure, I think that things have changed a lot over the past, I don't know, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Enough so that I think more people are invited to go out. Like they see it as like something that can be done as opposed to something that's fringe and, I'm not going to touch that kind of thing.
I mean, that said, I still think when I travel around, especially, other countries or other cities in the U.S. and even, Europe, you see a lot more embracing of cycling, a lot more people cycling. Do you think it's a mentality thing? Do you think it's an infrastructure thing? Do you think it's a policy thing? Do you think it's all of the above?
Yeah, historically, I think when you look at different places around the country where there is less bike infrastructure, you see a lot more people biking solely for recreation, for exercise, that sort of thing, and far less commuters. And I think where you see a lot of infrastructure, you see a lot more commuters, you see a lot more families on bikes. And I think you can see that pretty clearly if you look at the greater Boston area as a whole, where places like Cambridge, who have done like a superb job installing bike infrastructure over the past 5 years, have seen a huge booms in commuters, and just you can't go anywhere in Cambridge without seeing bikes. I think the Mass Ave Bridge, for example, has, even during rush hour, like 30% of the people on the bridge are bikes.
Wow.
That's crazy, unheard of, right? But that's not quite as true in places like Dorchester, where there's not so much bike infrastructure. Here you see a lot more people biking for recreation or for exercise.
Yeah. And that's still, you hear those stories, and then you still get a lot of opposition to adding bike lanes in new construction. For example, Blue Hill Avenue. I think if DotLife ever tried to put a bike lane on it, there would be riotous uproars. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people are still very car-centric.
Yeah.
I mean, American cities, in my opinion, since the end of World War II, the car boom and American cities were built to cater towards cars. And so that's baked into the psyche of a lot of cities. And so with driving your car around to your errands and such, is also you need parking. And so parking is a big issue. And I know from some of the articles I've read about the Blue Hill Ave discussion that parking is a big concern for a lot of the merchants that might be affected. So yeah, if you have a car in the city, there are considerations there are considerations that have to be met in order for you to have your car in the city. And if you're not used to cycling, and if you're intimidated by it, then you don't see cycling as an option. You see your car as, your option, your solution.
Yeah. I think a lot of even like the new buildings that are going up, some of them will not have parking garages or parking availability, but they will have bicycle storage and bike racks. And still you hear people in the civic associations, oh, that's pie in the sky. Like people aren't going to do that, but it is possible. We just have to, I think, be a little more deliberate and intentional about development.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of what the city's doing right now is building for the future, right? Because, when it's understandable why I think a lot of people, especially more on the outskirts of the city, need a car because, they work far away. And I think for a lot of people, like a car is the vehicle for economic opportunity, where there maybe isn't much in the neighborhood that they live in. But as you install bike infrastructure and safe infrastructure, you'll start to see more people biking, less people reliant on parking, and less traffic overall. And so, but these things are in the future. They're not necessarily right now. And so it's going to be a difficult fight.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of these infrastructure plans are really focused around just improving safety. Because as cars are moving fast on these streets, like it is a safety problem, especially on, Dot Ave, where, I think, what was it, 2-3 years ago, a cyclist was hit and nearly fatally injured. They just barely survived. But like these are real issues. These are real issues that need to be addressed now.
Speaking of safety.
Yeah.
But when you talk about bike infrastructure, obviously we mentioned bike lanes, but what else goes into that infrastructure conversation?
So there's a lot of different factors. I think some really clear ones are shortening the distance between sidewalks so that pedestrians don't have to cross nearly as wide of a strip to get to the other side. That can look like islands in the middle of a road, like if you have a 4-lane road, or even more like Blue Hill Ave. Like, it's really important to break up the pedestrians' walking cycles so that, it becomes easier. You're only looking at one side of traffic. Another big factor is narrowing traffic lanes. Okay. When you narrow the size of a traffic lane, cars just instinctively drive slower. Yeah. It's much more effective than, signage or that sort of thing. And as a bonus, when you narrow street lanes, you get extra space on the street. And so actually a lot of these bike lane projects are kind of a bonus. Like, the bike lane is a bonus, but when really the goal was to narrow the lane.
And slow the traffic.
Right.
Okay.
But from a lot of people's perspective, they see the bike lane and they go, they're narrowing our street because they want to install a bike lane, when really the opposite is true.
Right,
yeah.
Right. You're a Dorchester resident, Jack. Do you cycle around here?
Yes.
Do you cycle on Dot Ave?
Yes.
How is that experience?
Previous to this, I had a job downtown.
Okay.
And I biked to work every day.
Okay.
Year round. And I cycled Dot Ave to get downtown.
Yeah.
And I did that for about 10 or 15 years. And in that time, when I started, I was one of the few that I saw out there. But as the years went by, I did anecdotally see more and more cyclists.
Yeah.
And the place where I parked my bike when I was working, it used to be, again, there was a bike rack there, and I would lock my bike, and there'd be a few others. And in the summer, it would get busier, but there was always a parking space. But towards the last years I was doing that, if I didn't get there by a certain time, there was no place to park my bike.
The bike rack was full.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Right.
Frustrating.
Yeah. Definitely notable.
I was here first.
Right, definitely notable. But also, in the wintertime.
You biked in the winter?
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah.
I don't understand you people.
It's becoming much easier now.
It is.
But
yeah. Although today is probably worse than winter.
Oh, yeah. I'd much rather be, but I wish it was, 20.
But back then I used to see, in the summertime, a lot of cyclists, and then the cooler weather would come in the fall, and the number of bikes at the parking space would trickle down.
Yeah.
And then in the winter, it would just be me. And then after a couple of winters, there was another bike that stayed all winter. And then, and so by the time I was finished that career aspect of my life, there certainly were more people riding in the summer, but there also were a growing number of bicycles at the spot year round.
So if people wanted to try getting into cycling as a commute, actually, let's take a step back. Let's say they want to start cycling and they want to do it recreationally, just to kind of get comfortable. Are there trails that you guys recommend, places that you've been that you would say this is definitely a fun ride?
I think the Neponset Greenway is like a great example of that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
And it's very nice.
It's very nice.
Very well paved.
Very well paved. Yeah. That's just a great place to go.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of beautiful trails up north, like the Minuteman Parkway, the Northern Strand, even inner city bike paths like the Somerville Community Path or the Southwest Corridor are really great. Even if you're not experienced on a bike.
The Southwest Corridor goes down to, does it go to Hyde Park?
It goes to Forest Hills.
Okay.
Yeah, from downtown.
Any others?
As far as people, here at the shop, I have people coming in saying, I want to get a bike, and they haven't had a bike for a while, and some adults don't even know how to ride a bike.
Oh, wow.
And so there's definitely, for a lot of people, some anxiety and intimidation.
Yeah.
With doing this.
I will raise my hand.
Yeah. I've been cycling year-round, since I was a kid.
Okay.
And so for me, like biking in the city, I've been doing it for quite a while, so I'm very comfortable. And I pay attention, but I'm very comfortable, where I absolutely understand that if someone were just doing this for the first time, that this would be, a bit of a white-knuckle experience to start. So I tell people, you have your bike, and you work over at this place and you've figured out a route. And very often they say yes, and I'll tell them, what you should do is you should go there on a Sunday, ride that route on a Sunday when traffic's quieter, and just go do it just to get your bearings. So that Monday morning, your first
when
day
it's terrible,
biking, right? So I tell people that, and then I also tell people, have a good bike, a good helmet.
Yeah.
But I also tell them that as much as they may think they look ridiculous, they should absolutely go over the top to be seen.
Okay.
High visibility clothing, flashing lights. I mean, that's what I use. A few years ago, I was driving my car. I dropped my daughter off at daycare, and I was coming off a side street onto Dot Ave, and in the car, and I looked, and automatically you're looking for cars. When you get your license, it's like, look for cars. No cars, you can go. And I remember seeing a friend of mine who I knew from the neighborhood coming down the street this way. And in my head, I was like, oh yeah, there's so-and-so. And I was like, looking for cars. And no cars. And I was going to accelerate through, and I stopped myself. What are you doing? And, my friend, the cyclist, went through, and I was thinking, very often we're all, we wear a lot of earth tones.
Yeah.
And then when you're on your bike, you're vertically oriented.
Right.
And if you look outside, everything is vertically oriented. Trees, street poles, so that on a bike, you need to do everything you can to stand out visually. Mm-hmm. Just to, assert your presence. And I'm not saying that in an aggressive way, but just drivers are thinking, looking for cars. And I think it's slowly changing where they're looking for bikes now too. But still, that's when you learn how to drive, that's what you're taught.
Well, I think that's a good point. And I'm not sure if this is something that the Boston Cyclists Union focuses on, but education and getting people conditioned earlier, is that something that's in the works at all with from the policy perspective or from educational perspective?
I think from our perspective, I think cycling has a bad rap as far as danger is concerned. I think that it is statistically, it's just as dangerous as being a pedestrian or driving in a car. But perception-wise, I think a lot of people view it as this, extremely dangerous thing. When I first started biking, in Boston especially, the people around me were like, "What are you doing? Like, do you want to die?" But I'm still here,
Yeah.
I actually haven't ever gotten into any serious accident in Boston, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think what we need is more people biking. It'll become safer when there are more people biking.
When there's more awareness and visibility. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest thing is knowing where you're going, knowing your neighborhood, knowing your streets, and that gets learned by experience. Mm-hmm. And, visibility is very important, but it shouldn't be paralyzing.
Yeah.
Because even if you're fully decked out in all your gear, if you don't have the experience, then that is going to be the thing that puts you in danger. And I love that idea of going out on a Sunday, going out at night, going out really early in the morning. These are things that make it easier. Or even just going on these trails, like just getting your bearings.
And your confidence. Yeah. I want to talk about equipment. So if you are selling a bike to someone, first of all, how do you help them select a bike?
When a customer comes in and they say, I'm looking for a bike, one of the first questions we ask is, first of all, do you have a bike?
Okay.
Yes or no? And the second question is, what do you want to do with your bike? Mm-hmm. And some people say, I'm going to be doing the Pan Mass Challenge or some charity ride this summer. And so, I want a road bike to do that. And so that steers us in one direction. For most people, the answer to that question is, I just want a bike to get around, ride with my kids, go to the store, just, a reliable bike just to get around. And so then we go over the options of that, and after we show them the options and they, point out which ones, interests them, and then we figure out sizing and budget, and, and narrow things down.
Okay.
So it's a series of questions that just broad
Hone it
questions
in.
to
Yeah.
bring it down.
So what are the essentials that you want to make sure someone leaves with when they have a bike?
So a bicycle, and I always say a helmet,
Okay.
and then a lock. I can't tell you the number of customers who have come back to me at some point after buying a bike and just saying, someone stole my bike.
I've seen a lot of bike thefts on, I used to live in JP, so I have the JP Facebook group still, and there's often bikes that get picked up from even people's yards, and they try to resell them, and hopefully folks like you and others in the city are able to kind of help stop that to some extent, although I'm sure it's not easy.
Yeah, every now and then we'll get a phone call or an email sent from somebody somewhere in the city to, bike shops all over the city, just saying, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. My such and such bike was stolen yesterday, and this is what it looks like, and if anyone sees it." Unfortunately, they don't turn up. And the person who steals the bike doesn't come in to a shop and say, "Can you fix this?" And pretty much it's just they steal it, it's sold for
Facebook Marketplace or something. Yeah.
or maybe even less, and then it's just out there in the world.
So helmet, bike lock,
And lights.
lights. Okay.
And light technology has really improved. Lights now are often rechargeable and extremely bright, and they have a daytime flashing mode. So it's not, I don't use my lights on my bike even at night to see the road. There's enough ambient light in town to see the road.
Mm-hmm.
What I want is, the flashing
To be
light
seen.
to be seen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so there are a lot of lights now have a daytime flashing mode, so that even on a bright day like today, it's a pulse of light that
Yeah.
you see if you're in a car. So things like that.
And for the cycling aficionados, what are the extras that you either use or sell to people who are looking for, that additional piece of equipment?
On our end, a lot of people want phone holders so they can have a phone to find their way around town, and water bottle cages and things to carry water.
Are baskets still in?
Yep.
Okay.
Racks. Especially if you're going to be commuting to work.
Yeah.
A lot of people wear a backpack. When I used to commute to work, I stopped wearing a backpack because it's uncomfortable. You're sweaty.
Yeah.
And so you can get a rack in the back with bags. There are many different varieties out there. So you can make the whole getting to work on your bike or the whole going shopping on your bike experience much more, comfortable.
Yeah. How about you, Mandy?
I think overall, like, the best bike is the one that you're going to ride. And I think that changes for everybody. I think a lot of people want an e-bike now, which is great because I think a lot of people are turned off by pedaling on your bike. And an e-bike solves that problem.
Yeah.
They're really great. But I think broadly, whatever gets you on the bike is the best bike for you. And I think just taking things one step at a time. Obviously, looking at laws too, because you do need lights at night. But yeah, whatever gets you on a bike. I personally, I don't like any kind of racks or anything on my bike.
You're not tricked out?
No, I'm not tricked out. I have like a bunch of variety of different small bags, like shoulder bags that I have that fit whatever I need. Today I have a water bottle cage on my bike because it's so hot. But
Yeah.
yeah.
What about maintenance? How often do you tune up your bike?
When I started riding my bike, I didn't really want to pay a mechanic to fix my bike. Sorry. So I actually was able to learn a lot of it myself, and I think a lot of it is very accessible. There's a lot of groups, bike kitchens around the Boston area. There's one on .Ave called Dorchester Bike Kitchen, where they will teach you how to fix and maintain your bike for free.
So they don't cook bikes. That's
They
not
don't cook bikes.
It's a little misleading.
It's a little misleading, but they have all the tools you'll need. So, but obviously that's not for everybody, which is why bike shops are so wonderful. But I would estimate, I think you should do a full maintenance once a year, whether that's at a shop or on your own. And I try to clean my chain probably every 2 weeks, but I'm a little bit on top of that. I like a clean chain,
Yeah.
but you can probably get away with like once a month.
And do you carry any sort of tools in case there's a flat or a chain falls off or anything, or are you kind of stuck?
On a longer ride, I'll bring enough to fix a flat tire, but I think, that's for rides that are longer than like 30 miles, which I'm not doing all that often.
Okay.
Usually I ride with whatever I have. And if I get a flat, which I have every now and then, it's like there's always the train or the bus.
That's true. It's not like you're stranded in
No.
the middle of the countryside somewhere, typically.
And Uber now too.
And Uber, yeah.
Or, yeah. Any other maintenance tips, Jack?
I tell customers when they buy a bike that their responsibility is oil the chain and keep the tires pumped up to the recommended pressure. And then in answer to how often should I come in to get it fixed, I tell people it depends on how often you use it. If you just ride only on summer days like today versus someone who rides year round in all kinds of weather, that person definitely needs to come in for, a spring tune-up, cleaning, replacing parts. And so I just tell customers, if you just want to stop in and say, do you think this bike needs, I don't think anything's wrong with it, but do you think it needs anything? We try to give them an honest answer and say yes or no.
Yeah.
But oiling the chain and pumping up the tires is what
Those are the minimums.
everyone should be doing.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
So I want to shift to the social aspect of cycling, bicycling. You mentioned these bike kitchens. In addition to being maintenance, offering tutorials, what else do bike kitchens offer?
So that is their primary function.
Okay.
It's a volunteer community as well. There's Somerville Bike Kitchen. There's the BU Bike Kitchen for BU students. There's Bike to the Sea, which has one on the Northern Strand. And I think a lot of these bike kitchens also try to build kind of community with group rides as much as they can, and collaborate with other groups. There's a big group in Boston called Critical Mass. Every last Friday of the month, they do a huge group ride with usually hundreds of riders at this point that go all around the city. And those are a lot of fun, especially, honestly, if you're a beginner cyclist, I think riding with a big group like that can be very freeing because you're away from traffic, but you're on the street.
And where do they do these? Are they on trails or are they on?
They're just on city streets.
They shut down the street, or
They shut them down themselves.
Okay.
There's usually so many cyclists
by virtue of being such a huge volume.
Yeah,
But-
and they have marshals and folks doing safety. So
Okay.
so it is 100% safe.
It's a pretty controlled environment.
Very controlled,
Yeah.
very safe.
Yeah. What about, Jack, any social groups that you're aware of or that you recommend?
Off the top of my head, we used to have a group ride with the, kind of led by the shop in the summer, Wednesday nights after we closed.
Okay.
And there was a fast group that did, like 30 miles, and there was a more relaxed group that did 15 or 16 miles. And that went on for many, many years. And then the COVID summer pretty much put the kibosh on that.
Yeah.
And some people have talked starting it up again. I've told people that I'm absolutely willing to, use the shop to,
Facilitate it, yeah.
Trumpet it and announce it. And but that was a great start to the shop, and there was a community, a core group of people that many of whom I still keep in touch with today.
Yeah.
Who I wouldn't have met in the neighborhood, but for that. So,
We're very lucky to be in a location where we have urban and very quickly non-urban cycling options. We have the ocean, we have rivers and lakes, we have wooded areas. Like, it's a really scenic place to be a cyclist, I think. I want to talk a little bit about your group, Mandy's. You mentioned the crash data that you collect, and you have BCU labs too. Can you explain what the function is of those two functions?
Yeah, BCU Labs is our all volunteer run kind of like data team, similar to if you've heard of Transit Matters Labs. Yeah, they do like train tracking and that sort of thing. And so we're trying to do a very similar thing with biking. And there's a lot of really scattered data about bikes. I'm not a data person, but so I'm talking about this from an outsider perspective. But there's crash data, there's the Blue Bikes data, where people are going, what stations are used, that sort of thing. There's bike count data, some of which just got released, which is where I got that 30% on Mass Ave number.
Do you gather the data through like the city cameras or?
The city gathers the data and they release it publicly.
Okay.
And so our goal is to put it all together into kind of one place and tell stories with that. So I think our first two public projects that we have had and released are, one is a stress map of the greater Boston area, showing every single street in Boston ranked 1 to 4, depending on how stressful it is.
Is it all just 4s?
Believe it or not, it's not. There's a lot of 4s that really shouldn't be 4s. I wish they weren't, because I write on them on a pretty regular basis. But there's a lot of 1s in Boston as well. I think residential streets are mostly 1s, easy to ride on. But places, there's parts of like Columbia that are 4s and parts of Columbia that are 1s.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, these long thoroughfares, I guess, would have different sections that are more or less dangerous, or
yeah,
it's not even a danger factor, right? Or is that part of it?
It's part of it. It's a lot about how fast cars are going on those streets, and what the infrastructure looks like. It was developed by Northeastern professor and BCU board member Peter Firth, the ranking system. It's called Level of Traffic Stress. It's very, very cool.
Is that specifically for bicycling data, or is it just, it's about cars, so it can be used for pedestrian safety? And
it is specific to bicycling, but a lot of the same things apply to pedestrians. So I think streets where it's level of traffic stress 1 will feel the same amount comfortable for a pedestrian. And a lot of these LTS 4 level roads, I think a pedestrian would feel that,
Yeah.
Mass Ave by the Newmarket Square area in South Bay used to be, I think, a classic example of a 4.
Okay.
Really fast traffic, small sidewalks, just very uncomfortable for almost everybody. Slip lanes that allow cars to take turns at really high speeds. And I think, since the cycle tracks were added, since the traffic calming was added, since these pedestrian islands and these, bus improvements have been added, I think it's gone really from an LTS 4 to, I would argue, LTS 2, but it's very comfortable to ride on.
Okay.
But part of that was to tell people, like, okay, where would you feel comfortable riding, and being able to like map that out looking at this map. But also it's like, okay, where are the places where it's more uncomfortable to ride? Where are the places where there's a higher concentration of LTS4? Or where are there places like Columbia or Mass Ave where there's really safe parts to ride on and really dangerous parts to ride on the same street? Mm-hmm. And so we can use that kind of data to advocate to the city, like, we need to do better here.
Right. Or maybe even develop temporary alternate routes to get around some of those trickier areas.
Exactly. And another project that we have is the Landways project. Right now we have it for Cambridge and Somerville because it's a bit more built out, easier. But what it is everybody knows how to read a subway map, right? But what would that look like if we were to map out the bike network in a way that it looked like a subway map? And so we did that with Cambridge and Somerville. And you can look at it, there's like the bike red line. There's just this tiny little thing that doesn't go anywhere because there's no connecting bike infrastructure, safe bike infrastructure. And so we are able to use that, connect dots, and say, this is what the bike network could look like. So you can get everywhere in, Somerville and Cambridge for now just on bike. And we can use that to advocate to these city governments to say, this is the most important part to actually complete a bike network. And that's something we're working on with Boston as a whole now. We got the early skeleton of it, but it hasn't been released yet.
That's really cool. And it's much more helpful to go to them with specific data and specific proposals versus, biking isn't safe or whatever. It's much more actionable.
Exactly. I mean, the city's doing so many different things. They have so many different hats, and they're in these community meetings getting yelled at. And I think it's useful for us to show, like, this is where you can have like a really big impact and really improve biking for everybody. And when you improve biking for everybody, more people bike.
Yeah. I will say as a driver and a pedestrian, I think when these roadways are improved for cyclists, they're improved for everybody. Like, I don't feel comfortable in an LT4 area driving, I'm sure, and certainly not walking my dog. So
yeah,
I think it benefits everyone to improve these areas.
And the data shows that. I think on Mass Ave, again, by that Newmarket Square area, it was one of the most dangerous places to drive. And now it's significantly safer, It's a lot easier to see pedestrians. There's basically no interactions unless you're driving in the bike lane with cyclists.
Yeah.
And so, everybody's happy, everybody's safe.
Yeah.
But it's really a win-win in our eyes, but it's still a fight.
Yeah. Totally. The last thing I want to close on this topic is around advice you would give to, and I'm going to open this up not just cyclists, but also drivers, pedestrians, anything that you would want to be able to communicate to them.
Wow, that's big. That is a big question. I think that we're all in this together. We're all trying to get around the city. I think especially for drivers, like, if you see someone on a bike, that's someone who's not in a car. That's someone who's not going to take a parking space where you're going to go. That's someone who's not contributing to traffic. It's largely a myth that people biking cause traffic. The reality is more people driving causes traffic. And I think it's very obvious when you put it like that, but I think a lot of people are, they see more people biking and they see traffic getting worse in Boston, and
they correlate,
and
they
start to correlate the two, when really biking is kind of like biking, riding transit, walking places. Like, that's really the cure for Boston's traffic. And so I think, we really need to be working together to make Boston safer, have less traffic, be more eco-friendly, and sometimes that starts with you getting on a bike. Whether that's just to go to the grocery store. I love biking to the grocery store. But small steps. Sometimes you don't need to drive your car 3 blocks to the grocery store.
I agree with that, definitely. Jack, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I know the city has a promotional campaign, Scan This Street for Wheels and Feet. And occasionally you'll see signs on buses or on the subway. That's the city's effort to basically do what Mandy's saying, just everyone pay attention.
Yeah.
That, that the cyclists have a right to be on the road and pedestrians have a right to be, crossing the street. And so just for everyone to be mindful is...
Yeah.
And that, and of course I've heard some motorists say, oh, well, these cyclists, I saw one run a red light. And
yeah, of course.
And absolutely.
You know how many drivers I've seen run a red light?
But, so I also to cyclists too, that,
yeah.
You're in there, you're riding the roads, you're in the traffic flow, to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. One thing that I've had to train myself on after I moved to from a rural area to the city years ago is just checking both rear view mirrors before I open my doors, because you definitely don't want to door someone. All right, last question. Total, your favorite place to eat in Dorchester? Jack, you're a Dorchester guy. I'll start with you.
Well, there are a handful of restaurants around here that we frequent often, but last night, coincidentally, my wife and I went to Ghost Pepper at Savin Hill.
Nice.
We both liked it a lot.
Yeah, good margaritas. Yeah. How about you, Mandy?
I live in Alston, so I'm like kind of far away, but I do bike in Dorchester quite a bit because my band practices over here. My favorite place has got to be Bala and on Dot Ave, the Vietnamese sandwich place. Oh, I love that place.
I've heard so many good things.
You gotta go.
Need to check it out.
You gotta go.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This is a really great conversation. And Jack, thanks again for having us
Yes.
in your place. And people come check out Ashmont Cycle.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.